When we analyze the physical collapse of a structural beam, we do not look for a single surface flaw. Instead, we measure the invisible, compounding downward pressure that will eventually exceed its capacity to hold itself together. We can apply that same mathematical rigor to the modern workplace. Specifically, we can measure the threshold at which younger cohorts, Millennials and Gen Z, actively decide to abandon an employer. We define this metric as organizational commitment. This chart displays organizational commitment on a 5-point scale. Optimal environments, low micromanagement, balanced life, show a healthy 3.51 baseline. But in Group 1's toxic extreme, high micromanagement and depression, commitment drops to 1.92, a 78% relative negative impact. A variance of this magnitude is not a random occurrence. It is a compounding statistical penalty caused by specific organizational stressors that have been engineered into the work environment. The departure of modern cohorts is not an HR mystery. It is a structural engineering problem driven by calculable variables. To understand the failure point, we have to isolate the variables. Micromanagement is a systemic leadership style that pushes centralized decision-making to its absolute extreme. This is defined by excessive scrutiny, the routine over-criticism of independent judgment, and the active suppression of autonomy. The second variable is work-related depression. This is the clinical consequence of sustained workplace stressors that erode psychological well-being. Finally, work-life balance serves as the modifier. We are analyzing this not as a perk, but as a mathematical regulator of stress. We will deconstruct how micromanagement strips autonomy to induce depression and destroy commitment, and demonstrate how work-life balance operates as a statistical buffer against this collapse. To interpret the data, we start with the psychological baseline. Millennials and Gen Z enter the workforce with a foundational expectation for task discretion and participatory decision-making. Kelly's followership theory provides the framework for how employees respond to leadership. These cohorts naturally aim for the effective follower quadrant, characterized by high engagement and independent critical thinking. But when a manager extracts task discretion to exercise total control, they violate the employee's basic need for self-determination. This pressure pushes the employee out of the optimal quadrant and forces them into an alienated state. In this state, employees comply strictly out of fear of criticism. They withdraw their innovative ideas and critical feedback, becoming yes people who engage in passive apathy. Control-oriented practices intended to guarantee high-quality output generate the exact opposite: disengagement and compliance-based silence. A common assumption in implicit leadership theory is that younger workers, having been raised by helicopter parents, actually want highly centralized, directive leadership. If these workers need constant guidance, high supervision management should theoretically provide comfort. We need to explain why the data shows it instead induces anxiety. Researchers utilized an independent samples t-test to measure childhood rearing against workplace preferences in the millennial cohort. This scatter plot compares parenting intensity against a preference for micromanagement. The trend line is flat. There is no significant positive correlation between a highly managed childhood and a receptiveness to micromanaging behaviors at work. Millennials and Gen Z actively resent being excluded from decision-making, regardless of their family background. The helicopter paradox is a myth. Micromanagement degrades motivation across modern cohorts without providing any of the assumed psychological safety. The psychological alienation observed in individuals scales into systemic pathology when measured at the organizational level. To map this, we look at the Pearson correlation matrix, which quantifies the relationships between managerial behavior and employee health. This highlights the transmission between micromanagement and work-related depression, showing a strong positive correlation of 0.684. Constant scrutiny and the loss of autonomy directly induce moderate to severe stress and psychological illness. Now look at how that induced depression correlates with organizational commitment. There is a powerful inverse relationship here. As depression scales upward, loyalty, retention, and organizational identity are mathematically dismantled. Micromanagement acts as the catalyst in a chain reaction that converts managerial control into clinical depression, terminating in the total abandonment of the organization. Given this destructive trajectory, we have to find the point of intervention. How can an organization statistically interrupt this collapse? Without intervention, the relationship is a straight line. As depression moves along the x-axis, organizational commitment plunges on the y-axis. To find the solution, we look for a moderation effect, a third variable that changes the strength of that negative relationship. By adding work-life balance to the z-axis, our graph expands into a three-dimensional surface plot. Hierarchical regression shows that when work-life balance increases, it acts as a structural buffer. A high level of balance visibly flattens the slope. Even in the presence of depression, a balanced lifestyle protects organizational commitment from falling to the collapse point. This interaction alone explains an additional 4.5% of the variance in the total data model. Work-life balance is a quantifiable shield, absorbing the impact of severe workplace stressors that would otherwise destroy retention. We can now fully explain the 78. While organizations can buffer this damage by promoting balance, that is a defensive strategy designed to manage the symptoms of a deeper failure. The operational reality for engaging modern cohorts is simple. The mathematical optimum for retention and performance is the structural elimination of micromanagement in favor of true delegated autonomy.